Well, welcome, Alex. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Sally. I'm really glad to be here.
All right, so we are diving into the activity list on applications, and different platforms have it different ways. I think most people know about the Common Application. Your background is with the UCs, which has a different format, but there are important commonalities. So we can absolutely sort of let's dive into kind of generally speaking, what are activity lists and what is the purpose of them? Why are colleges asking for this? And I think that domestic students here in the US have kind of a basic understanding, but honestly, when I talk to families from like overseas, they're like, why are you asking this? Like, why does this matter? So let's kind of keep them in mind when we're answering this initial question of what they are and what their purpose is.
Right, absolutely. And that's such a great point, Sally. As I know in my time in admissions, I did work with a lot of either international students or families where it was first generation going to college, coming from a different country where activities, what is that on the college application? But for the US educational system and a holistic review, the activities section is actually a really valuable part of the application. If we think of the application as a whole, we think there's the academic section where we see your transcript, potentially test scores. So I know what type of a student you might be in the classroom there. I can somewhat predict how you might perform at a certain college, at the college level. But the activity section, the purpose here is for me to get to know a little bit about who you are. What are your interests? What are your passions? What have you accomplished in your high school experience? So I think this is more of kind of who you are as a student. And the great thing about the activities section is making that personal connection for the admissions officer. So we can see, what excites you? What have you accomplished? And also, what impact have you had? Have you done an activity over all 4 years of high school? Are we trying something new this year? Have you had a chance to really make an impact by managing a special project or taking on a leadership position? These are all some of the things that we can get to know through this section.
hmm Yeah, one of the things that I always emphasize to students is that while your academics have to be balanced,
Mhm,
English is important, even if you're going into engineering, it's still very important. For activities, there are none of those prescribed things. You don't have to do community service, you don't have to
mhm,
have a job, but all of the above are great things to do.
mhm,
So it was always very interesting to me to see what students chose to do.
mhm.
Right? That by itself was already kind of interesting, you know?
Right. Yeah, I definitely think so. And this is something when I chat with families a lot, they think there's this like secret checklist that colleges
Mhm,
are using, and you have to be that really well-rounded student in all of your activities. So the job, the
mhm,
volunteering, the sport, the clubs and organizations. And that's simply not true. As you mentioned, I love to see a well-rounded student in your academics. I'd like you to have
mhm,
challenged yourself across the board there. But for
mhm,
your activities, I really want to see a student who's following the things that they're excited about. So for some students, that's going to be more time in volunteer work. For other students, maybe a sport is taking up the majority of their time. Perhaps they're playing at the varsity level on their high school team and then also on a travel team, which is a bigger time commitment. So I
mhm,
think for your activities, this is really who you are and how you're choosing to have that personal growth. And one of the, I think, big misconceptions about activities is a lot of students think, well, should I keep doing this if it doesn't relate to my major? And my answer is always, is this something that excites you? Is this something you feel like you're growing in? Does it make you happy? If yes, then absolutely yes, we should keep doing that because these activities, they don't always have to relate to your major. Sometimes
mhm,
they naturally do, but in reality, these are the things that are making you that student with dynamic interests, someone who's going to be really interesting to a college campus.
Yeah, I would love it when I saw a student who maybe wanted to be a physics major, but and so did science Olympiad, absolutely, because they
Mhm,
loved it, but also was on the debate team because they wanted that challenge and they love discussing, challenging topics and making their point. And so that is also a positive. Those things still count.
mhm.
So, yeah, absolutely. How much weight is given to the activity section by colleges? Like, how would you define? I mean, obviously, that's another thing where I think families think there's a precise formula and there isn't, but I think we can give a sense.
Mhm. Right. Well, I will say, yes, different colleges, it's going to be different, right?
Hmm.
But the activities section can definitely carry a bit of weight in the review process. I will say, if we're talking about, selective colleges, first and foremost, we have to prove that we can do the work. And we
Hmm.
prove that through, having some great academics that are on par with that particular college we're looking at. But then, what's really going to potentially make a difference in who's admitted if students are looking, similar on paper academically is this activities section, is the letters of recommendation, and any of those essays that are coming in as well. So I think this is sometimes a section where students maybe are not spending enough time thinking about it and really sharing specifics about what they've been involved in. Because I think that's something that's really important in this section too. It's not just, I was a member of the football team for 4 years, but rather, what did you do on the football team? Did you encourage your teammates? Did you have a leadership position there? Those are the things that are really interesting to the admissions officer.
Yeah, and I think I love what you say too about like on the football team. Everybody knows what football is. So you
Mhm.
don't even need to explain what that activity is. You can use all the space to talk about the ways that you added to that team, right? Like, for example, maybe you weren't a leader, you weren't a captain or anything, but you were the one who organized the hot dog and hamburger cookouts. And
Mhm.
you were somebody who mentored the younger players when you saw them getting stressed out or disappointed. Like that is a kind of leadership, even if there's not a title. And the colleges wanna know about that.
Right. Yeah, I'd say that's the most interesting thing about you is what you specifically did. As you said, most of us, we all know what football is. We all know the
Mhm,
the core there. We know what a touchdown is, but what has the impact been on you and what impact have you made on others? That's what's really interesting here.
mhm. Yeah, I worked with a student who was a football player and by his own admission was like I think he called himself pathetic when he first started, but what so he kind of his comments were about sort of learning to pick himself back up after repeated failures, but like, continuing to enjoy it.
Mhm.
Because and that's why he kept doing it because he just loved it, I made sure that was on his activity list, and of course, I was a high school counselor back then, so I made sure that that was in his recommendation too, because it was pretty rare to see a student be like, "Yeah, I was the worst one on the team again, but I really had a good time,"
Right. I
So
love that. And that's something that can be really beneficial in this section too, showing that you've had growth over
Mhm,
time. Um, growth, commitment, leadership, these are the types of things that we're hoping to see from this section. So you may not have to be, winning the state championship, but to
mhm.
have grown over time, even on that personal level, I think that's so important.
Absolutely. Now, how do like let's see a student. So we've already talked about kind of putting in the details and the personality. But like what are some other tips to help a student? Like let's say there is a student who has some pretty significant achievements. The Common Application gives 150 characters in the sort of description box. How like what are some of the things they can do to show off their accomplishments and sort of what they've done to maximum effect?
Right. Yeah, I think this is, one of the tougher parts about the Common App, especially if you're a wordy person like me. You have to be concise. And this is where we can treat it a little bit more like a resume, in that we don't have to have these full, complete sentences necessarily. Instead of saying, I um, played clarinet in the high school band, you can just start with played clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still getting the message across. And then you can share exactly, what your accomplishments were playing the clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
So making sure that you're maximizing the character count there, because you only have 150. So as long as you're getting the most important details of your message across, that's what's important. Also thinking about those 10 slots. So on the Common App, we have 10 spaces we can utilize here. So you want to think about how you're inputting your activities. So thinking about going down the list, having that number one activity being the area where you feel like it's been perhaps the most impactful. So maybe areas where we've had significant awards or a leadership, or places where it's been a larger commitment over time. And you want to do that going down the list. So having those kind of highest impact activities first. And then for the students that may have more than 10 activities, I will say, some students do. It is not necessary to fill up all 10 spaces there. You can still have a great application with a few really meaningful activities, because the quality is much more important than the quantity.
Mm-hmm.
But for those, high-flying students who have done a million things in high school and are really worried about how do I cram it all into the application, that's where I think we do want to prioritize, highest impact first, but then also thinking about all the other areas of your application. Perhaps in your personal statement, you're sharing a little bit about an activity. So perhaps we're going to share that there and not in the activities section, or making use of the supplemental essays to
Mm-hmm.
share some information that may not fit into these 10 slots. So thinking about how do I maximize my application and make sure I'm not necessarily repeating myself too much throughout the different pieces of it.
Exactly. And certainly you can mention in both places, but how
Mhm.
are you highlighting something different? I think you bring up a really important point. The essay doesn't need to be the activity list because we
Mm-mm.
have an activity list, right? So
Right.
I talk over and over again to, and this comes up especially again with people who maybe haven't grown up within the United States system of
Mhm.
education. They think that the essay should be, I mean, kind of like the way the British system is. Your essay is
Mhm.
supposed to be, this is what I'm going to major in, this is why, these are my accomplishments within that area. That's not what the common application essay is
Mhm.
about. And instead, you can use the activity list to list all the different things that you've done, whether related to your major or not.
Mhm.
But you don't need to do it in your essay because there's another place to do it. So,
Right, exactly. And that's the best way to maximize the
mhm,
application. The activities, they show me, what are some of the accomplishments you have? What are some of the things you're interested in? Maybe what are your responsibilities? Maybe you have a job, maybe you're helping with the family in a certain way. But then that essay, that's going to show me maybe a little bit more about your character. So these are
mhm.
all kind of pieces of the puzzle that give that whole picture, or as whole of a picture as we can make in, a few pages of an application for the admissions officer.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, all right. And so typically, how long does it take for a student to complete the activity section? I get this question all the
Mhm.
time. I find it very hard to answer. So I'm kind of curious what you'll say to that.
Oh gosh, it is so hard because it's really subjective, right? It
Mhm.
depends on the student. But my best advice is to start sooner than you think you need to and allocate a little bit more time to it, just because I think one of the hard parts is using that concise language. And that's not something that at this point a lot of high schoolers have a lot of practice with. You probably haven't created a resume. This is somewhat the
Mhm.
first time you're doing that. So, learning to find some of those action words and really descriptive words that stand out. I think word choice is important here. And then also making sure you can think about, again, the order of your list and what comes first. So I'd say I don't have an exact number for you, which I know is what everyone wants is, how many hours should I put on my calendar? But I'd say start early. This time in August, we're
Mhm.
recording early August. This is when the Common App has just been released. I'd
Mhm.
say it's worth, taking a look and getting started now so you have plenty of time before, an early action or early decision deadline to create something that you feel really proud to submit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, starting earlier rather than later is always good. I would actually say too, if there's parents of any juniors, like you could
Mhm.
even start making some notes in your junior year because that helps you kind of keep track because they're going to be asking how many hours per week, how many weeks per year. Students come to me and they're like, "Well, I don't know." And I say, "Well, you're going to have to figure something out." And I don't know. I wasn't there with you. So,
Right.
um all right, great. Well, I think that's it for today. I do want to mention too, by the way, that we have blog posts on the activity list. So feel free to go to blog.getintocollege.com. And you can probably find some good information there too. All right. Well, thank you so much,
Mhm.
Alex.
Okay, thank you, Sally.
All right. So do join us next week when host Ian Fisher will be interviewing Liz Sharon. I hope I'm saying this correctly. She's the CEO of the Coalition for College, which is the organization behind the coalition application. So, what an opportunity to hear more about the coalition's future. I am definitely going to be listening in on this one. In addition, he'll be reviewing some of the various acronyms commonly used in financial aid applications with one of our finance colleagues. So that'll be pretty useful. And finally, I want to remind you that you don't have to listen to our shows live. Every show is accessible 24/7 on the Voice America website. You can download every show for free on Amazon Music or iTunes. If you're curious about other topics, again, I want to point you to our archives. You can find them along with our blog posts on blog.getintocollege.com. And we're here every Thursday, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific.